Steve, it's a delight to be here with you.
It's good to be with you too.
And how grateful we are for your time with us, as well as the book that you've put together, which all began many years ago with a document that John Wesley wrote,
Yes.
the founder of the Methodist movement, called Character of a Methodist. And I'm wondering, why do you think that topic was important to Wesley during this time? And why is this such an interest to you to have written a book about it? And why should it matter? Why should character matter today?
Character is always important in an age when life becomes too externalized. Whenever we measure our value or we measure our worth by what we do, or even worse, how we appear to others. And there was some of that going on in the 18th century in Wesley's day. Pomp and circumstance is probably just a quick way to summarize it, but Wesley believed that the church was in need of renewal, and that renewal was going to have to happen in his day in ways similar to the ways it had happened in the past. And that's sort of from the inside out. He's drawing on a whole character ethics history. This is a deep thing out of the church mothers and fathers, Clement of Alexandria, who believed that integrity is really where you finally determine how healthy the church is, or how healthy your faith is.
Can you trace through your own ministry? You were a preacher for a while, a pastor of a church, interacted with lots of people in many contexts, both as a pastor and in the world of teaching. Are there people that you can think of who embody the kinds of marks of Christian discipleship that Wesley would have described?
The first person that always comes to my mind, McGray, is my dad. We grew up in a little town in West Texas, and here's the summary. My dad could make friends with people who couldn't make friends with each other. And I noticed that as a child. My dad had friends who were not friends of each other. And as I watched that happen as a little kid, I liked that. I liked that quality.
Yeah.
But when I try to unpack it and say, so what was Dad doing? He was genuine. He was patient with people. He had a winsome personality that included humor when it was appropriate. And I guess I would like to hope that maybe some of his actual DNA got into me, but I can say for sure that kind of witness in our little hometown was not only something that people in the town noticed, but something I noticed as his son.
Well, when you think about character, often the way the character is used in describing the character of a person,
Yes.
we often use adjectives to describe a person's character. Hardworking, honest, decent, corrupt. But the way Wesley talked about character was all with verbs, at least the way you've outlined the book. First of all, begin with what the 5 characteristics are, what the 5 marks of a Methodist are, and why do you think those were all driven by practices, by verbs?
Well, the 5 marks are: a Methodist loves God, a Methodist rejoices, a Methodist gives thanks, praise, and loves others. The reason I think verbs are there is that every action really is the product of a motivation. If I decide to call you on the telephone, it's not, that call really doesn't begin, when I dial your number. It begins in the decision to call you. And I think Wesley understood that the character of a Methodist is not, it is a verb, because verbs not only carry the intention forward, but they're rooted in something prior to themselves.
Yeah.
So, a Methodist loves God as an act because you've received the love of God prior to the motivation to return it. You can go down the line in all 5 marks that way. And that's classical Christian formation. It's a matter of the heart before it becomes a matter of the hand. You don't play one off against the other, but you do understand the order in which those most effectively occur.
Yeah. The moment we start talking about these things as practices that are required or incumbent upon us, if we go too far with that, then we start thinking about maybe an improper view of works. And so, to what degree, and I think you already mentioned it, to what degree are these practices not efforts that are initiated on our part in order to aspire to some ideal, but responses?
As we'll be seeing, Gray, every one of these marks is a response to grace.
Yeah.
These marks are not square one. Square one is who God is and how God's at work in our lives individually and collectively. So that no matter what a Methodist does or says, it's always because God first loved us. God first put joy into us. And so we're always responding. Wesley went out of his way to emphasize that the means of grace, which are mentioned in the character of Methodist, but not totally unpacked, Wesley went out of his way to say these are the usual channels by which God confers. As soon as we turn those into formulas,
Right.
and even worse, proofs. Here's how I know I'm a Christian because I have devotions every morning for at least a half an hour. Then you've really got the cart before the horse.
Right. Well, you mentioned the phrase individually and collectively, and I think those are both important, aren't they? In that character, in terms of spiritual formation, is best accomplished when it's not a solo act, right? And the hope is that there are folks who will be journeying with this book in the context of a small group community in which relationships are formed, in which new bonds of trust and accountability are there. It's one of the basic ingredients of the Methodist movement is to do it as a part of a community. So to what degree is character best formed in the context of community?
One of Wesley's little phrases that he uses only a handful of times, he called some people holy solitaries, and that was not a compliment. So the way I think of it is to ask the question, is church singular or plural? If you ask an English teacher, you're going to get singular, and that teacher will immediately respond, churches is plural. But if you ask a theologian, is church singular or plural? It's always plural. Church is never singular. I think that's the reason Paul calls it a body of Christ, with many members, many parts. Wesley was concerned because he saw in his day, in somewhat the same way we do in ours, that there was too much privatized spirituality going on, a kind of siloing of one person from another. And he didn't see that as a good thing.
Now, there may be some folks who take a look at those 5 marks, and even though you've said these are not aspirational goals, they're not things that we need to work toward, what would you say to somebody who says, I'm supposed to love God and rejoice in God and love others and pray constantly and give thanks all the time? They look at those standards and feel like they're always going to fall short. What would be the encouragement for a person to continue on that journey and to keep trying to develop those characteristics?
It has to be your God concept. Because if God is handing those out as rules and regulations, if God is handing those out as do these or else, I think it's in the Old Testament, I think it's Leviticus 19:2, where God says, be holy for I'm holy.
Yeah.
There's some traditions where that sounds more like a threat than an invitation.
Yeah.
It's kind of like be holy or else.
Yeah.
And I always want to know what the or else was.
Yeah.
You lose track of the holiness because you don't know where the gotcha is. So what if God is so gracious that there are no gotchas in this?
Yeah.
What if God is so absolutely loving that God has already figured out that we're not going to do it perfectly? And that what pleases God, as Merton says, is the desire to please God. Well, you practice anything from a whole different vantage point, seems to me.
Do you think character work really is the secret to renewal? There's so many churches that are looking for the next best thing to renew their church. Denominations are looking for the silver bullet to renew the church. For Wesley, it seems to me from what you've said, character work, the inner work, is what will transform the church and ultimately the world. Do you really think that?
Well, I happen to be one of those Wesley scholars, if scholar is the right word to use to describe me, who believes that John Wesley was starting a third order like the Franciscans or the Dominicans. Now, to the extent that that's true, you go back to those movements. You look at Francis and Clare. You look at Dominic. You go back, to the Order of Benedict. You say, what are these people doing? How are they shaping the people that gather around them? 2 things: a constitution and a rule of life. All right. Now, if Wesley's taken cues from these people, a constitution is about what kind of person do you want to shape by the grace of God. And a rule is once you've shaped the person, how they're supposed to act. And it's interesting, the first two things Wesley publishes when Methodism really begins to have an identity is the character of a Methodist, the constitution of Methodism, the person we want our people to be, which is not a Methodist but a genuine Christian.
Yes.
And then once they're that, how are they going to manifest that? Doing no harm, doing good, tending to the means of grace, staying in love with God. That's one of the beautiful things about Reuben Job's little 3 simple rules. See, and thanks to Abingdon Press, what we've got right now is a 21st century representation of that same 1-2 punch
Right.
that John Wesley was trying to do in the 18th century. But when you say, why was he trying to do it? That's how he thought souls were formed. Character and conduct. The inward holiness followed by outward holiness.
And in a nutshell, I assume that's what your hope is that would happen in the life of someone who reads this book and is part of this small group journey. What, in a nutshell, do you hope people take out of this and receive into their life?
My hope, my prayer, and I know you share it with me because we both know this book together. You've written the excellent study guide that goes along with it. My hope and prayer is that a person might come to the place where Thomas Merton says we must face the fact that in matters of the spiritual life, we'll be beginners all our days.
I love that.
My prayer is that this will not be looked at as 6 weeks to a new you, 5 steps to victory.
Yeah.
And that, yes, we did 5 marks in 2000, whatever. And no, this is the launching. Really, it's the continuation. It may be the reconnecting with the highest and the best that we know. My prayer is that it will ignite in the heart a person to see, with the amount of time they have left to live on the earth, how deep and wide they can go with God.
Once again, thanks for offering this. We look forward to our continued journey together.
Me too.